Hey parents and coaches, are your kids using the right glove? The most important skill for youth athletes to learn is how to play proper catch. The problem is, most youth gloves are made with bad leather and are too big for small hands. They actually make it harder to play catch. That's why former Major League Baseball shortstop Kevin Smith created Cali gloves. Cali gloves are crafted from 100% Japanese kip leather and are the perfect size for kids. All Cali gloves come with palm slits, finger loops, and elastic wrist lacing that encourage proper hand placement, the right closing patterns, and give kids more confidence to go make plays. Cali gloves even allow parents to break in the glove without stretching out the fit. It's the glove Kevin wishes he had growing up, and the glove all his teammates want for their kids. Visit caligloves.com to learn more and help your kids play better catch. That's Cali Gloves, K-A-L-I gloves.com.
Welcome to this week's edition of In the Clubhouse with EMD Baseball. I'm Andy Kiriakidis, joined by my wonderful co-host, Mr. Keith Glasser. How are we doing, sir?
Great. How are you?
Good. We are going to take a second and kind of peel back the veil on kind of the college recruiting calendar from a coach's perspective and kind of give a lay of the land of how coaches at a high level kind of go about handling recruiting in the spring, and as well as some of the stuff that goes on during the summer and the different timelines and different plans that coaches can kind of put together. I think it's important for people to understand some of the limitations, but also just understand how coaches kind of go about things. And it'll take a few minutes to unpack that subject. So where do you want to start with this one, Coach?
Yeah, I thought that, if you've listened to this long enough, you've heard us talk about this in pieces over the course of a lot of different podcasts, but I don't think we've ever done I know that we haven't because I have a list of them all. We've never done a kind of dedicated short to what a generalized recruiting calendar might look like from a coach's perspective in the spring and summer. So I thought we could take a couple minutes and just kind of hash it out and give the listeners a little bit of an idea of what it looks like. So, I think first and foremost, you obviously start in the spring, right? With the high school game, and when the Division I recruiting calendar goes live on March 1, it's when coaches can then, leave campus and go out and watch players play. Obviously, in certain parts of the country, high school baseball is not being played at that point in time, i.e. here in Rochester. We're recording this on St. Patrick's Day, and it was 68 degrees yesterday on Monday, and we got 3 inches of snow last night. So riddle me that, Batman. But I think from a high school standpoint, you have to understand that the college coaches, first and foremost, are in season during your season. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be coaches at games. It just means that most programs in this country are not going to sacrifice coaches on the road during practice and game time. Are you going to see them? Yeah, it's going to depend on what class schedules and how their practice schedule sets up during the course of the year, right? When I was at Siena, we'd be able to practice at 1 o'clock. We were off the field by 3, and we were able to get to a lot of high school games and see everybody all week long, as long as we weren't playing games. I was coaching at RPI. I couldn't practice with class schedules till about 4. Wasn't a lot of high school games I could get to. I get to them on Mondays or off day, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it was a little bit more of a struggle for me to get there, obviously, because of our practice time. So, generally speaking, coaches are going to be going out and seeing all of the local high school kids that they either know about or need to know about, so that they have a really good feel on everybody it is in their area who is potentially recruitable to their program. The other thing you might be doing during the spring is, if there's an arm or a bat, maybe a high-level arm or a high-level bat that you knew about in the fall, followed all winter, he's made a jump, and you want to go see him in the spring, you might take a little bit more of a longer drive on maybe he's throwing on Monday and it's your off day. You can jump in the car and go watch someone play. Or even a commit, right? Like it might be an arm that is committed that is throwing on Monday, and you want to go see how his, where he's at and what he's doing. You can go jump in a car and go watch him play and make sure that, you're dotting your T's and crossing your I's from that standpoint. So it's kind of a generalization of what the high school season kind of looks like. And again, a lot of that is centered around the fact, and you have to keep this in mind, that the college coaches are playing during your season. I think the other thing too, especially at high school games, generally speaking, a lot of those guys, unless they're going to stand behind home plate with a radar gun, you're probably not going to know a lot of them are there. They're going to go incognites and try to not be noticed. And it's true of a lot of college coaches. They want to make they want to see what you're doing when you think no one's watching, right? Like they want to see who are you when you think no one's there. If I tell you I'm coming and you're on your best behavior, I'm not really getting a true depiction of who you might be. So a lot of times guys will show up and kind of hide and see what they can discern. But from we'll get into the summer here in a second. I'll let you add on here to the spring. But I just thought that from a high school standpoint, that's kind of a very generalized approach that the vast majority of college baseball will take. Are there going to be, are the SEC and the ACC flying around the country in some regards? Yeah, they are. They have more staff, they have more resources, they have the capability to do that. They need to know the best players in the country, where the vast majority of college baseball really just needs to know the best players in their area, best players in their region that they might be recruiting. If you're the parent of a high school baseball player with college aspirations, you already know the recruiting process can feel overwhelming. Endless showcases, nonstop emails, and big promises with very little clarity. That's why we recommend Diamond College Showcase Camps, the nation's premier academic baseball showcase. At Diamond College Showcases, every college coach in attendance is there with a purpose: to coach, instruct, evaluate, and recruit. Every player is seen, every player is engaged, and every family leaves with a clear understanding of where they truly stand. This is not a mass camp. College coaches run the drills, evaluate every athlete, and provide honest professional feedback that you can trust. Diamond College Showcase Camps are built for serious student athletes who value both baseball and academics. If you're looking for transparency, clarity, and a recruiting experience that respects your time and your player's future, Diamond College Showcase is the place to be. To learn more, visit diamondcollegeshowcase.com.
Yeah, I would say probably I'll kind of go back to my days at William & Mary, where I think the best way to put it is that you're pretty targeted during the spring. Most of it is more on the local side. Like we were very much focused on making sure that we had a good beat on the state of Virginia, being a Virginia State school. So tried to go see arms whenever possible. One of the luxuries I think you do have at most schools is that you can usually kind of get your practices done before like 3:30 and give yourself an opportunity to go and see guys, on different days. Obviously, you never sacrifice a game. There are some schools that have enough staff where they can get somebody out on a game day, which, I have my thoughts on, but either way, it's usually pretty targeted. Guys that you've either seen or you've gotten a really good recommendation on. You're generally not just going out to randomly see a high school game. Maybe when we were in Williamsburg, there's 3 high schools right there. Like, you got nothing to do on a Tuesday night after practice and the 2 high schools are squaring off. Like maybe you shoot over there just to kind of see what's up. But usually it's pretty targeted, and you reserve longer drives and longer trips for like kind of finishing decisions or guys that are super high priority. Like for an out-of-state guy, like we would occasionally drive up to Jersey to watch a kid pitch. But most of it, you're talking a couple hours, usually within your general region there. And I think that kind of sums up recruiting in the spring. At the Division III level, when I was at Vassar, a lot less active in the spring. A lot of video, a lot of phone calls, trying to lay the groundwork for the summer, but not a ton unless the kid was local. Now, we recruited nationally, so it was a little bit different. And when you're working at a high academic school, the talent pool you can recruit from regionally is usually a little bit less. So, I think that really sums it up. It's like targeted, very targeted. You're not randomly going to high school games. You're going to see guys that you got a pretty good understanding that they're worth your time, and you're trying to get a really good evaluation on them. So, summer. What I'll say about the summer is that it's hectic. Like from a coach's perspective, it can get really hectic. Most programs are going to have 2, usually 3 guys out on the road at any given time. I think it's targeted in slightly different ways. Like you're going to have your list of priority guys that you need to go and see in whatever class that you're currently recruiting right now. You know, you're looking at 27s and 28s. So maybe you're trying to put the final touches on your 27 class if you're a Division I school. So you've got your short list of dudes that you got to go and see, and then you got a short list of 28s that you got to see. I think more broadly, you're trying to be really good in your specific area that you typically recruit in. So when I was at William and Mary, we wanted to make sure that we had a really good beat on all the teams in Virginia. You know, whether it was the Stars or the Canes or the Richmond Braves, you know, the Virginia Cardinals. Like we wanted to make sure that we had calls out to all those coaches, that we had an idea where those guys were going to be, which guys we should be targeting. And then we would kind of go out of state and look for, you know, guys that we relied on, you know, with good reputations that we could, you know, make some phone calls about, you know, certain needs that we might need. But I think a lot of schools in general are trying to be really good in their area. You know, if you're higher level, you know, you're talking ACC, SEC, yeah, you're probably following around, you know, the 10 best travel teams in the country. You're going to some of the bigger events. But I think that every school has their niche and they have their success points in terms of where they're going to recruit. Like if you're a mid-major Division I school in the Northeast, like you're probably spending a ton of time out in Boston. You're probably spending a ton of time down at Diamond Nation, because that's where the vast majority of recruiting is going to get done. You know, some of those schools don't even go down to Georgia anymore because by the time Georgia rolls around, if you don't know the guys on the teams from your area, you probably haven't done your legwork and your homework at that point, and you should be seeing those guys plenty in your regional stuff. So, but summer gets hectic, and you stack on top of that, you're going to have your own camps, which is a big part of the evaluation process. And then most schools are going to work some showcases and some specific events. I mean, you were on the D3 high academic recruiting trail for so long at RPI. Like, I think that's kind of an own beast in itself in terms of how that happens. You want to kind of talk to what that can look like? Because I think it's kind of unique.
Sorry, everyone. I was fighting for the mute button there.
Gonna get yelled at in our comments.
I know. I'm going to get yelled at in the comments. Yeah, I think the academic side is obviously a little bit of a beast unto itself. You're going to your summer is structured a little bit differently than, you know, what it was when I coached at Siena, right? You know, at Siena, we were, you know, you could kind of just show up anywhere to tournaments, to games, to showcases, and not to say Siena's not a good school. But the likelihood of you being able to get in the vast majority of kids that are on that field that you're watching are probably pretty high. Whereas in the academic world, whether it's obviously the Ivy League or the Patriot League, the Liberty League, the NESCAC, the Centennial Conference, if you're out west in California, there's some conferences out there that are really tough academically. You can't necessarily do that, right? Like you can't just necessarily show up to a field and assume that the vast majority of kids on that field are going to be competitive from an admissions standpoint. The other side of it in the academic world, and probably a little bit more specifically with, you know, STEM type schools where I was at RPI, is that, you know, we didn't have liberal arts from a traditional sense, right? Like we didn't have history, we didn't have English, we didn't have the traditional liberal arts as a college. So, you know, you had to know, or I shouldn't say you, I had to know or have a really good idea of the kids that were on the field that were interested in engineering, and also were going to have the grades competitive enough for me to bring to admissions to get into school. You know, so that would narrow it down even more. So you have to be, you know, you talk about being targeted from a high school standpoint, you do the same thing in the summer from a game standpoint and from a tournament standpoint. Obviously you hit the big ones, right? Like Super 17, you can hit Boston Open, things like that, you know, regional based. Where it gets a little bit different in the academic world is when you start hitting the academic showcases, which are designed for kids who are high-end academic kids to be in front of a bunch of college coaches all on 1 or 2 fields or 4 fields, for them to be able to kind of showcase what they do, not only from a normal showcase setting, but a gameplay standpoint. This can be used in a multitude of different ways. One, obviously, from just straight up identifying players. It can also be used for, you're following up on kids that you saw maybe the year before or you got video on. It also could be, hey, I've seen this kid twice in games. I'm going to see him here at Headfirst or Diamond College Showcase, and I'm going to make a decision on whether or not I think he's good enough to continue down the road recruiting. And then also coming out of those camps, you have your own camps as well, and other college camps that you might be going to. In the academic world, a lot of guys will hit a lot of the same, kind of high-end academic camps, because a lot of the kids that are going to go to that school are interested in engineering or science. I could hit, Columbia camp. I've talked about this a million times. Coach Peretti was a staple for mine because it has an engineering school and it's really good. And kids were interested in engineering and science at that camp. They weren't good enough there. RPI could be a really good option for them at the Division III level from a baseball standpoint. So it gets it's still very hectic because you're hitting a lot of the showcase camp series. But the other side of it is you're not supplementing anything with the showcases. You're trying to get a really good feel for the players that you have either already seen or you're going to want to go out and see again. So the timing of it really kind of dictates what your schedule then becomes, right? Like, you have your staples of, I always had the staples of tournaments that I was going to go see, the games I was going to go see, and then I would make sure that I checked off kids that we were interested in from that standpoint at those, and then supplement it with guys that maybe we just saw at the Diamond Showcase College or Diamond College Showcase Camp, and go see them play in a game the following weekend, or I'm going to see them in 2 weeks at a tournament, things like that. So it's a little bit more fluid. I think the one thing to keep in mind, especially when we're talking what recruiting calendars and things like that look like, is most college staffs are going to have 2 to 3 guys on the road at any given time. So, it's not necessarily something where there's only one guy who's out doing all the recruiting. Does that happen? Yes, it does. But the majority of programs are going to be able to at least have 2 guys out on the road at one time. Especially Division IIIs, they're going to have at least 3 guys out at one time. So they're able to cover a lot more players and really make evaluations, based off of what they've seen. And it's kind of a good checks and balances thing, right? Like, obviously, I think in recent years, a lot of people, want to get in front of the head coach. And, sometimes it's only at a camp or a camp on their campus that you can get in front of the head coach. But, the reality is you might be getting recruited by, depending on how programs run it, right? Like, if the pitching coach does all the pitching, like, he's the guy that you're going to want to be talking to and throw in front of, right? Like, not to say you don't want to throw in front of the hitting guy or the head coach, but like the pitching guy is the one you kind of want to show up and show out for all the time, because that's the guy who you're going to be spending a decent amount of time with once you get to college. But it's a good kind of checks and balances where if the pitching coach really likes you and then the head coach watches you and he really likes you, there's 2 guys that are like, hey, that's a kid who we've seen, 3-4 times combined. He's throwing well every single time. I think this is the guy that we should, continue to move forward with and see if we can get him into our program. But I think that's something that kind of gets missed in a lot of the recruiting stuff, is that only one person is going to see you and recruit you. And that's just not true. You're going to be seen by multiple people on that staff. And in a lot of programs, it's designed that way so that, if I see something that, hey, I've seen this kid, and you have these conversations in the office, right? Like, how many times you and Case had it out on guys that you liked, and how, I know I did with Carl and with Jimmy at Siena and Coach Rossi and, Farish, who worked for me, and it's, to be clear, you're not having it really out with people, but like, you're having conversations of like, well, hey, listen, when I saw him, this is what I saw. And, good, bad, indifferent, like, you have those conversations because ultimately you're all driving at the same thing, trying to get the right kid into the program that's going to be able to help you win, and what you see might be different than what someone else sees. and maybe I missed something. And maybe, when the head coach went and saw him, he was, had horrible body language and it wasn't really good. Like that holds a little bit more weight in the recruiting process there. So, I'm off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's important to note that when when you're going through the recruiting process, you're going to be seen by multiple people on staff if you're being recruited by a school.
Parents, if you've ever felt overwhelmed trying to navigate youth sports, there's a new resource designed just for you, Team Match. Team Match is an online platform built to streamline how families find the right youth sports teams by location, sport, and skill level, all in one place. It also provides a safe, organized space for kids to share their accomplishments, stats, and highlights while giving coaches and teams a clear way to connect with athletes who are the right fit. Less searching, less stress, more confidence in the process. Youth sports just got simpler for families. This is Team Match. Check it out today at teammatchsports.com. Yeah, we always like to make sure that multiple people had eyes on guys. Yeah, I think it's important to get different opinions. It's important to see them at a different place. Like Murph always liked to see a guy before that, we ultimately made a decision, because at the end of the day, it's his program. If I went and saw a pitcher and I really liked him, I'd come back with my report. I'd come back with my video. I'd sit down with Case and be like, hey, man, I think you need to go see this kid. Sometimes you come back and you're like, hey, man, you don't need to go see this kid. This is what I got. Unless you feel strongly that like maybe this is an off day or, whatever, there's different reasons that you circle back on a kid, but that type of communication is pretty typical. I think the only other thing I want to kind of add, just to kind of put it in perspective from an organization perspective, how it kind of works, is you have the teams that you're looking to make sure that you track. So you kind of plan, all right, where are they going to be? They're going to be at this tournament. They're going to be at this dynamic. They're going to be up at Diamond Nation, wherever it might be. And then you have your list of guys that are specific. So some of them are going to be on those teams, right? There's going to be other guys that you need to go see that aren't on those teams. And you start to build your summer schedule out. But things change and things are fluid. Like guys get crossed off the list, guys commit. And Case was unbelievable with this. And I learned a ton about organization and kind of how to work through it. He was super organized with where we went, who we saw, tracking everything that we were doing. But, pretty much every Monday morning we would sit down and go, all right, well, who's going where this week? Who do we got? So-and-so's throwing this day. Andy, you've seen him twice. Case, you need to go see this guy. Or Murph had seen a hitter 3 times and he's like, hey, man, I really like him. I think it's good if you go and see him. And I would go see a guy. And then you have your list of guys that you need to go see, or just in general, like, hey, we haven't seen these teams enough. Like, Andy, I need you out at Virginia Tech this weekend. There's a dynamic tournament out there. These are the 3 teams that we need to really bear down on. Here are the 4 guys on those 3 teams that we need to make sure we come back with good reports on. Let us know if anybody else pops up. And that's kind of how it works often, right? And, there's flexibility and you got to be flexible because things change real quick. But coaches don't just whimsically go about the recruiting process. They're not just randomly showing up at places. They're there for a purpose. They're there with a plan of who they need to see and when they need to see them and the decisions they need to make. So, yeah. Anything else you want to add to this?
No, sir.
All right. Well, hopefully that was insightful. I'm sure we'll cover it in podcasts here moving forward. But yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you next week. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.